Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you all for joining. Thank you very much, Glen, for teaching us this precious teaching. Um, I want to remind everyone you have all the course materials and the information, including the link for Dana in the page in our website of Dharma Friends of Israel. So I pasted the link here to the page in the website. I'm also putting in the chat the direct link to the Dana. So it's there. And also one suggestion from me, we have the question and answer at the end of the session. And we thought it would be nice if you post the questions on the chat so everyone can read. But of course, if you feel more comfortable to send it to me, it's okay. Of course, you can post them in English or in Hebrew. And that's it. I wish everyone a fruitful second day of the retreat.
Thanks, Shia. I'd like to begin by welcoming everyone back to this Mahamudra retreat, realizing the nature of the mind. This is the second of 6 days, 3 days in over 2 weekends. And today we're going to start in with the SUTRA Mahamudra practice. So let's have a look at what we'll be covering in this first session. We'll start with a meditation, mindfulness of breathing, focusing on the rhythm of the breath. We'll be using that as a bit of an anchor point for the practices today, the Shamatha practices within Mahamudra. Following that, we'll do a short review of some of the main points from yesterday. Then we'll introduce this topic of Sutra Mahamudra in the text. And then within it, we'll begin to look at the Shamatha practice. And within the Shamatha practice, we'll start to also look at the prerequisites for Shamatha practice and meditation in general. And then we'll do a meditation on what's called bare attention to really emphasize the importance of observing the object in Shamatha directly, not to imagine or visualize or so forth, just observe the object directly. And this will also give us a sort of segue into the Shamatha practice of observing the mind. So we'll do that in that second meditation. And then again, finishing with some question answer at the end of the session. Let's begin with the meditation. Finding a nice, comfortable posture. Let's begin. Allowing your awareness to descend into the body and simply become aware of sensations throughout the body. And then using the out-breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. Softening and relaxing all the muscles in the face. The mouth and jaw, soft and relaxed. And all the muscles around the eyes, soft and relaxed. And in this way, allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And if you find it helpful, you can take 3 slow, deep breaths, maintaining awareness of sensations throughout the body as you breathe. And then allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Simply allowing the breath to flow naturally and effortlessly. Not trying to control it in any way. And then preparing the mind. And as Panchen Losang Chögyal Gelsen recommends, to begin with a virtuous, pure mind by going for refuge and generating bodhicitta. And so we can do this sincerely. We precede it with these 4 thoughts that turn the mind. This precious life of leisure and opportunity is rare and easily lost. The world and those within it are impermanent. I too will die soon. The results of my virtuous and non-virtuous actions will without fail ripen within me. And there is no genuine happiness to be found within the abodes of samsara. And so I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And by my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And then allow the mind to come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. Allowing the mind to remain relaxed, still, and clear. And then from that stillness, start to become aware of the rhythm of your breath. Noticing if it's deep or shallow, slow or fast, long or short, without trying to modify it in any way. So simply becoming aware of the rhythm of your breath. and maintaining an ongoing flow of mindfulness of the rhythm of the breath. With a particular emphasis on relaxation. On each out breath, relaxing and releasing any tightness or tension, and releasing any thoughts that may have arisen. And if you find that you get distracted from the breath, the first thing to do is relax. Then release the distraction and very gently return to the breath. So relax, release, and return each time you become distracted. Simply keep coming back to the breath again and again, patiently and happily. Or if you find that you're simply falling into dullness or drowsiness, then use the in-breath as an opportunity to arouse and refresh your focus, to sharpen your focus on the breath. And we can bring the meditation to a close. Let's start with a short review of some of the main points from yesterday. The text that we are using as a basis for this retreat is a text called The Main Path of the Victors, a root text for the precious Gelug Kagyu tradition of Mahamudra by Panchen Losang Chökyi Gyaltsen. And so the main path of the victors, the word victor or Jinna in Sanskrit is another name for a Buddha. And that's someone, a Buddha is someone who's gained victory over the two obscurations, the afflictive and cognitive obscurations. What they are, we'll be looking at in the second half of this retreat next week. And the root text is the text you see in bold as we go through, and then that's padded out with some extra text from Panchen Losang Chökyi Gyaltsen's own auto-commentary, his own commentary on his own root text. And Mahamudra here is, Maha means great, Mudra means seal, stamp or seal, and here the word stamp or seal is referring to emptiness, because emptiness stamps or seals all phenomena, that all phenomena have as their ultimate nature emptiness. And it's great because if we come to realize emptiness, we can achieve the great goal of enlightenment. And here we're looking at the Gelug Kagyu tradition of Mahamudra. We saw that Mahamudra, the system, is a system of practice brought into Tibet from India that forms the basis of the Kagyu school of Tibetan Buddhism. Whereas the main system of practice in the Gelug school, brought in from India through Lama Atisha, is Lam Rim. But here, Tsongkhapa, who was then later the founder of the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism, also received Mahamudra instructions from Kagyu masters and synthesized these instructions with his own profound method to gain an understanding of emptiness. And hence, then we have this Gelug Kagyu tradition of Mahamudra, which was passed down master to disciple, eventually comes down to Panchen Losang Chökyi Gyaltsen, and he wrote this text from all the oral instructions that he received from his master. And in the text outline, we saw that we have three main outlines entering into the composition: the actual explanation and dedication of virtue. And in the entering into the composition, we saw that the Panchen Lama is paying homage to Mahamudra itself, the realization of nature of mind, but also paying homage to his guru who introduced him to the nature of mind. And also then he makes a promise to compose, to really to complete the text. And within the actual explanation, the three areas we're looking at in the text is there's preliminaries, the actual practice, and conclusion. And in conclusion, that also covers what to do outside of meditation. And with the actual practice, what we saw yesterday is we can practice Mahamudra at two levels, Sutra and Tantra. First, we practice in Sutra and then Tantra. But because the main emphasis here in this text is on the Sutra level of practice, then the Panchen Lama actually presents Tantra Mahamudra briefly first, just so we have an idea of what it is about, and then spends most of the rest of the text looking at Sutra Mahamudra. And in Sutra Mahamudra, there's two main practices, Shamatha Vipassana. And we'll be looking at the Shamatha practice today and tomorrow, and then the Vipassana practice of emptiness we'll be covering next weekend. And so with these preliminaries, we saw that this Mahamudra practice is a Mahayana practice. It comes within the Mahayana vehicle. So the door of entering into Buddhist teachings in general is going for refuge to Buddha Dharma Sangha. But then the door of entry into Mahayana was in addition to generate this bodhicitta. And it's also the central support for the Mahayana. And so therefore, for the preliminaries for this Mahamudra practice is first, of course, to go for refuge, and then in addition to cultivate this bodhicitta. And he says, the Panchen Lama, without these being merely words from your mouth. And therefore, to help avoid them just being merely words from your mouth, then we have what's called the common preliminaries. These are preliminary practices that give us the basis to really be able to effectively go for refuge and generate bodhicitta. And we saw there those four common preliminaries, sometimes called the four thoughts that turn the mind. to reflect on precious human life, to make an aspiration to make our life meaningful, and to reflect on death and impermanence, to understand this precious opportunity we have is not going to last forever. So to aspire to make our life meaningful from now on, from this moment on. And then how to make it meaningful, to then first reflect on the causality of our actions, understanding that harmful actions leads to suffering, beneficial actions leads to happiness, and thereby adopting an ethical lifestyle. And then in addition to that, to really reflect a little bit more deeply on the situation we find ourselves in, that there's no genuine happiness to be found out there, that the genuine happiness lies within our own mind. Likewise, the source of suffering lies within our own mind, our mental afflictions. And then by cultivating this view of genuine happiness, we will then be able to develop the wish to be liberated from suffering. There's what's called renunciation. And on that basis, then, we'll understand that everyone else is in the same situation, and we can go one step further, not only wishing ourselves to be liberated from suffering, but also the wish to help liberate everyone else from suffering, which is bodhicitta. And so we can see how these common preliminaries can really provide an effective basis for entering into the Mahayana through refuge and bodhicitta. And then we saw that in the preliminary section of the text, also uncommon preliminaries. These are preliminaries for the Tantra level of Mahamudra practice. We had those 4 points there, the refuge and bodhicitta, again, entry and support for within Tantra as well. But in addition, then to purify the mind of negativities and accumulate the 2 collections of merit and wisdom. And so through those 2 practices, we're engaging in Vajrasattva meditation practice to purify the mind through these 4 opponent powers. Mandala offering is to accumulate merit and wisdom. And then the last and very important uncommon preliminary is the Guru Yoga, to really have a close connection to a guru, to really practice this Guru Yoga so that we can receive inspiration and blessings from the teacher to really put ourselves in a state where we can best enter into this tantric practice, Tantra level Mahamudra practice. And we saw that in terms of preliminaries, Panchen Lama said that all the Indian and Tibetan scholars and adepts praised these preliminary practices. So don't think that they're merely preliminary practices, even though they've been explained in the context of preliminaries, but rather practice them by integrating them into your actual practice. So these preliminary practices are not just something we do as a beginner, tick them off, leave them behind, that we need to continue to practice those preliminary practices to make sure that we continue to have a solid foundation for both Sutra and Tantra level of practice, or in this case, Mahamudra practice. And then within the actual practice, we saw that there are many ways of approaching Mahamudra, but they can all be classified as either Sutra or Tantra Mahamudra. And we're spending most of the text in Sutra Mahamudra, so therefore the Panchen Lama just gives a brief explanation of Tantra Mahamudra first. And we saw that the Tantra Mahamudra refers to the clear light mind. So in Tantra level of practice, we're gaining access to the very subtle level of mind. Here called clear light mind, also called sometimes primordial consciousness, pristine awareness, Rikpa, given many different names. And so in Tantra level of practice, in Tantra level of Mahamudra, in particular here, we are gaining access to this very subtle mind. And we do that by causing the energy winds that are moving through the various channels in the body to enter, abide, and dissolve in the central channel. And we can do that through a number of ways. That this naturally occurs at the time of death. And so therefore we find that people engaging in Tantra level of Mahamudra will be trying to get the clear light mind to manifest in meditation, but very difficult. So as a backup plan, they also then engage in practices that prepare them for the time of death by going through the death disillusion process, developing the ability to do lucid sleep, lucid dreaming. These sort of mimic the death process. So to be able to maintain awareness through the death process so that when we come to the clear light of death, this clear light mind naturally manifests. We don't have to put any effort. And if we can maintain mindfulness, then we can meditate right there using that clear light mind of death, and in best case scenario, achieve enlightenment. But the skillful methods we use in our life to gain access is, again, here the text says, penetrating vital points of subtle Vajra body, meaning to penetrate means to focus on vital points along the central channel, various chakras. Because where we put our attention, then the wind energies go there. Because what we find is that by focusing the attention, we have at the subtle level of mind, we talk about the subtle mind and the subtle body being these subtle wind energies. And the analogy often given in Tibetan Buddhism is the lungta in Tibetan, the wind horse, that the subtle energies are like the horse and the mind is like the rider on the horse. So they go together. So if you move your mind to that point in the central channel, then your subtle energies will move there naturally. And so this is how we get them into the central channel, dissolve at the heart chakra, and thereby the very subtle mind becomes manifest. And in addition to that, we talked briefly about another skillful method to cause the clear light mind to manifest, were these pointing out instructions, which comes in with what's called essence Mahamudra. And so we saw there, we can really talk about 3 levels of Mahamudra practice. Here in the text, we're only talking about Sutra and Tantra, but often in the Kagyu Mahamudra tradition, they add this 3rd level of essence Mahamudra, these pointing out and non-meditation instructions. So they seem very attractive because it seems like pointing out instructions. We sit there, the master says a few things, and then boom, we realize the nature of mind. It's not quite that easy. And so what we saw in that quote from the book from Daniel P. Brown, the Pointing Out the Great Way, he said the early essence tradition did not include extensive descriptions of spiritual practice. The extraordinary view of the mind was directly transmitted from master to student. The extraordinary practitioner gains this realization once the master directly points out the real nature of the mind through these pointing out instructions. But he says, ordinary practitioners generally do not understand the pointing out instructions because their minds are too clouded by coarse level thoughts, mistaken ideas, negative emotions, and dualistic perception of the external world. Therefore, ordinary practitioners must refine their minds through standard practices before essence view can be introduced. And we saw this a little bit also in the text, where Panchen Lama talks about these 2 types of practitioner. The simultaneous person, who's a little bit like this essence Mahamudra, is that someone who can simply rest their mind in a non-conceptual state and can actualize this clear light mind. Whereas a serial person needs to go through all the stages, the preliminaries, bodhicitta, shamatha, vipassana, generation completion stage, and then eventually into the essence tradition. But we saw there that the simultaneous person is someone who can do this because they've done a lot of work previously in the foundation practices, the preliminaries, the shamatha, vipassana, generation and completion stage practice. And on that point, His Holiness in his commentary, he also comments about these 2 types of practitioner. So he gives some very good advice. So I'll read that out. So that's on page 130. Because there is this tendency, particularly in the modern world, we want to take shortcuts. And so a lot of people who come into Mahamudra and also Dzogchen systems of practice, they hear about these pointing out instructions and they go, wow, that's very attractive. That's for me. I want to do that. I don't want to do all these other things. Those other things seem like a lot of hard work. I just want these pointing out instructions. But here His Holiness gives some very good advice regarding that. He says, according to one Kagyu text, the method of practicing for those whom everything happens at once is powerful medicine. That's the simultaneous person. But it is deadly poison for those who progress through graded stages. In other words, the method of practice of meditating solely in the non-conceptual state of mind is suited only for those of sharpest faculties. For those who are not of their level, such practice brings only harm, no benefit. For them, the medicine acts like a poison. And then he's quoting a text which says, this text has explained that for those whom everything happens at once are persons who have trained extensively through stages, either in previous lives or earlier in this life. As a result, meditation on the non-conceptual state of the mind, without needing to rely on any further meditation on penetrating vital points of the subtle Vajra body, alone causes clear light mind to manifest so that everything happens at once. Such meditation does this by acting as a circumstance for triggering the ripening of potentials built up from previous practice with energy winds and so forth, so that they automatically enter, abide, and dissolve in the central channel. If a practitioner has not built up these potentials, then no matter how extensively he or she may focus in a non-conceptual state of mind, this person is unable to manifest clear light mind or pure awareness. They lack sufficient causes. And then he goes on to say, before Milarepa studied with, and Milarepa was considered the greatest yogi in the history of Tibet. Before Milarepa studied with the great translator Marpa, he studied with a master of the Dzogchen tradition. This Lama told him of the guideline instruction that without need to study, meditate, or even do any practice, one can instantly become a Buddha. When Milarepa heard this, he just lay down and went to sleep thinking, wonderful, now I do not have to do any practice anymore. He did not even have a good dream. When he woke in the morning, this master scolded him for his pretension and laziness. He told him these instructions certainly did not pertain to him, and that in fact, his mental obstacles were so thick, he could not help him any further. He mentioned there was, however, another guru, a translator who had studied and trained in India with the great master Naropa, who could be of great help. At merely hearing the name of the great translator Marpa, Milarepa developed extraordinary faith and respect in him, convinced that he was the appropriate guru for him. When he went to study with the translator, however, Marpa gave him a very hard time, didn't he? Milarepa had to endure a great deal of difficulties and make incredible efforts to practice in stages over many years. But as a result of his efforts, he was able to reach total enlightenment in this graded manner. Therefore, we should not imagine that practitioners who progress through stages are stupid or inferior, or that they do not attain the same result as those for whom everything happens at once. Also, we should not be pretentious and think we are more advanced and well prepared than in fact we are. So I think some very good advice there from His Holiness Dalai Lama. And so that brings us now to the next part of the text, which is Sutra Mahamudra. So now we'll have an extensive presentation of Sutra level of Mahamudra practice. And here the text says, Sutra Mahamudra refers to the ways of meditating on emptiness as directly indicated in the three mothers, which are the extensive, middling, and brief Perfection of Wisdom sutras. And so emptiness is a translation of the Sanskrit term shunyata. And emptiness is the fact that everything is empty of inherent existence, that nothing exists from its own side. And this was taught by the Buddha in the Perfection of Wisdom teachings. And here these three mothers, three of the main Perfection of Wisdom teachings. The extensive one is the Perfection of Wisdom in 100,000 stanzas. The middling is only 25,000 stanzas, and the brief is really only 8,000 stanzas long. One of the classic Perfection of Wisdom sutras that is very well known is the Heart Sutra, which is just 25 stanzas long, a very short text describing this view of emptiness. And so Sutra Mahamudra is really all about coming to realize emptiness. And then the text goes on to say, as said by the supreme Arya Nagarjuna, there is no path to liberation other than this. So Nagarjuna lived in the 2nd century, and he wrote this classic text called Mula Madhyamika Karika, often in English called the Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, where he is describing this view of emptiness that is presented by the Buddha in the Perfection of Wisdom teachings. And this text really forms the basis of the Madhyamika philosophical system. which is describing this view of emptiness as taught by the Buddha in the Perfection of Wisdom teachings. But the Buddha taught many different teachings and taught many different things. And so out of the various teachings the Buddha taught, we actually have 4 philosophical systems evolving in India. There is 2 systems called Vaibhashika and Sautrantika, which really come out of the 4 Noble Truths teachings, what's called the first turning of the wheel. And here, the fundamental insight that we are gaining to achieve liberation is to realize there's no autonomous self. And then there's also the Chittamatra or mind-only philosophical system, which is based on what's called the third turning of the wheel teachings. And here there is talk about emptiness, but the emptiness here is the emptiness of there being no external objective world. The world is empty of being external, independent world. Whereas in the Perfection of Wisdom teachings, also we have the view of emptiness. But here the word emptiness is referring to the fact that everything's empty of inherent existence. Nothing exists inherently. And this forms the basis of the Madhyamika philosophical system. And here, Nagarjuna, who's really the founder of this Madhyamika philosophical system, says there is no path to liberation other than this, meaning that to achieve liberation, we have to realize emptiness. That although in the other philosophical systems, they wouldn't say that. In the Vaibhashika Sautrantika, they would say to achieve liberation, we can simply, if we realize no autonomous self, we can achieve liberation. And similarly with the Chittamatrans, they would say, we just realize there's no independent external world, we can achieve enlightenment, in fact, with that. Whereas Nagarjuna says that those insights into no autonomous self and no external objective world are useful, but they're not enough to achieve liberation. We must realize this emptiness, that nothing exists inherently if we are to be liberated from suffering. And so here then the Panchen Lama says, here, meaning in this text, I shall give instructions on Mahamudra in accordance with his thought. So he's going to base his Vipassana insight practice on this view of emptiness as presented by Nagarjuna based on these Perfection of Wisdom teachings from the Buddha, and describe ways to introduce the nature of mind in accordance with the instructions of the lineage masters. Now here, when we talk about nature of mind, the nature of the mind, we can talk about conventional nature of the mind and ultimate nature of the mind. The conventional nature of the mind is simply the fact that the mind is clear or knowing or has clarity and awareness. And this is something we realize through Shamatha practice by simply observing the mind. By simply directly observing the mind, we get to directly see the clarity and the knowing quality of the mind. Whereas the ultimate nature of the mind, emptiness, is how the mind exists. This is realized through Vipassana practice. And to do this, we need to investigate the mind, not just simply observe it. We need to investigate the mind to come to realize that the mind, like everything else, is empty of inherent existence. And then we saw, and in the text now, it gives an etymology for the word Mahamudra. So we pulled this part of the text out to the beginning yesterday. And so this is actually where it comes in the text, this what we looked at yesterday. And again, so here it says, why is that which is taught here called Mahamudra? Again, quoting that King of Concentration Sutra, the nature of all phenomena is a seal. So this idea of seal or stamp is one translation of the word mudra, is that emptiness seals or stamps all phenomena, that all phenomena are stamped by emptiness, meaning that the ultimate nature of all phenomena is emptiness. And here, when we realize this, we can achieve the great goal of liberation, of enlightenment. But here in Mahamudra practice, we're not just focusing on emptiness itself. We are focusing on emptiness with respect to the mind. We're coming to realize emptiness by focusing on the mind. That's Mahamudra. Those of you who have studied, say, for example, Lam Rim within the Geluk school, then when it comes to the emptiness practice, then often we begin by focusing on the person. Where is the me that seems to be here? And so we establish the view of emptiness. We come to realize emptiness classically through realizing the person is empty of inherent existence. Whereas here in Mahamudra, and also we find in Dzogchen, we are directly focusing on the mind itself. Hence, Mahamudra and both Dzogchen, nature of mind practices. We're coming to realize the ultimate nature of the mind. And then the text goes on to say, there are many lineages of practice in terms of coming to realize this emptiness, each one having their own unique name, such as, and then he gives a long list here. The first four, the co-emergent union, amulet box, 5 parts, and 6 cycles of equal taste, are ways that Mahamudra has been packaged in the various sub-schools of the Kagyu school of Tibetan Buddhism. So we have sub-schools in Kagyu tradition, like the Karma Kagyu, Shangpa Kagyu, Drikung Kagyu, Drukpa Kagyu. Those of you who have heard of the Karmapa, he's the head of the Karma Kagyu sub-school in the Kagyu school in Tibetan Buddhism. So each one of those packages these Mahamudra instructions in their own unique way, and they give them these names. Then we also have the 4-syllable system of practice that comes from Indian Mahasiddha Maitripa, the pacifier system of practice from a great Indian Mahasiddha Padampa Sangye, and then from one of Padampa Sangye's main students, a great Tibetan yogini, Machik Labdron, we have the Che practice, which is actually widely practiced in all of the 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism, very popular practice even in the modern world today, within all 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism. And then the Dzogchen system of practice, the great perfection within the Nyingma school, the instructions of Madhyamika view, this is coming within Geluk. We find this in, for example, the Lam Rim, and so forth, including Sakya school and a number of other systems. So they're all packaged and given individual names. But then the Panchen Lama goes on to say, however, when investigated by a yogi learned in definitive meaning scriptures, skilled in logical reasoning, and experienced in meditation, they all come down to the same intended meaning. So even though at the surface level, they have different names and look a little bit different, they all really come down to the same point to come to realize that the mind is empty of inherent nature, to come to realize ultimate nature of the mind. That's why they all come down to. And so then he says in the text, this being the case, from among the 2 approaches within Sutra Mahamudra, seeking to meditate after having gained the correct view and seeking the correct view after having meditated, here I shall explain in accordance with the latter approach. So there are 2 ways to approach this. First, we meditate, we gain the correct view of emptiness, and then we meditate, meaning we achieve single-pointed concentration of shamatha. Or we first meditate to achieve that single-pointed concentration of shamatha, and then we seek the correct view of emptiness, in other words, vipassana. And so this is the method we're going to use here. And so he's now quoting from a couple of texts. He says, now it is true that there are 2 different approaches. However, the approach of seeking the correct view after having meditated is in accordance with that said by the protector Shantideva, great 8th century master Shantideva. He says, vipassana endowed with shamatha completely destroys the afflictions. Knowing this, first seek shamatha. And then also quoting this pile of Jewel Sutra, through abiding in ethics, concentration is attained. Having attained concentration, cultivate wisdom. So therefore, he's following this. We're doing shamatha first, and then on that basis, we engage in vipassana practice of emptiness. So he says, this being the case, what is the method for initially cultivating shamatha? And here the word shamatha is a Sanskrit term. Shama means calm. Ta means to remain or abide. So it's often translated as calm abiding, and it's to develop single-pointed concentration. Now, there are many levels of concentration we can cultivate. The word for concentration in general in Sanskrit is samadhi. Here in the Mahayana, very much emphasized the level called shamatha. So hence we see here shamatha practice. Whereas in the Theravada Buddhist traditions, they emphasize these 4 levels called the 4 levels of jhana. So when they talk about doing concentration practice in Theravada, generally they say we're doing jhana practice. That's the same as shamatha practice in Mahamudra, developing single point concentration. Then on that basis, we engage in vipassana practice. VI prefix, and in the Pali, the Pali term is vipassana, same word. The VI prefix means higher, superior. Pasana means to see, often translated as then special insight or simply insight practice. So how do we cultivate shamatha? And so in shamatha, it says, regarding this, there are two outlines. There's preparation and actual practice. And so what we're going to look at today and tomorrow is the shamatha practice. We're going to look at the preparation and then the actual shamatha practice. Whereas the vipassana, which follows shamatha, there are two outlines there. There's a general presentation of how to cut through to realize nature of mind, and then the presentation of emptiness, which is rather extensive. Now, in terms of shamatha practice, then in terms of preparation, then here we start with a quote from Maitreya, J. Maitreya, who says, "The place where the intelligent practice is a place with easy access, a safe place, a place with good ground and good friends, and the requisites for yogic practice." And so to explain that, I've got a quote here from Tsongkhapa, who in his Lam Rim text, he talks about this. He says, the area should have 5 attributes. Easy access, and so we're talking about someone sort of going into a sort of longer term retreat, meaning so that necessities such as food and clothing may be readily attained. A good place to live is where there are no wild beasts, no enemies, etc. Remember, in the ancient days, often people went and meditated sometimes in the forest, but maybe if there's sort of wild animals there, that's not so good. So we need a safe place. A good piece of ground means that there's not any sickness around. Offering good companionship, meaning that we have around us ethically disciplined and like-minded people. This is very important to support us in our practice. Brings up in Buddhism the idea of sangha, of spiritual community. And I want to talk more about that later. And then the requisites for yogic practice, Tsongkhapa explains, there's a place that's well situated, meaning that there's not many people around in the day and there's little noise at night. And so these are some of the things that we need to look for in a place if we want to do some particularly longer term meditation retreats, to find a good place to do these sorts of retreats. And then within that, it's explained that while remaining in such a place, the text says, it is necessary to rely on the prerequisites for shamatha by abiding in pure ethics, having few desires, being content, and so forth. And definitely necessary to do the 6 preparatory practices. So here, preparation for shamatha practice is 6 prerequisites to establish a suitable basis for shamatha practice. We've looked at the outer prerequisite there in terms of the place. And then there are what's called the 5 inner prerequisites. And then there's also the 6 preparatory practices, what we do at the beginning of each meditation session. And we'll look at that in the next session. In fact, also, I was going to talk about the 6 prerequisites here, but I see we're running short on time. So we'll also move that to the next session, to these 6 prerequisites. And so what we'll do now then is we'll go straight to the meditation. And in this meditation, we'll do it on the basis of this quote here from the Buddha, where he says, Bahir, which is a disciple of his, you should train yourself thus. In the seen, let there be only the seen. In the heard, let there be only the heard. In the sensed, let there be only the sensed. And in the cognized, let there be only the cognized. Meaning that we are to observe these fields of experience directly with what's called bare attention. And so what we're going to do is we're going to cycle through these fields, the visual field, the auditory field, the tactile field in the body, and then the cognized field, which is the mental field, using this bare attention, just observing directly the objects in that field, without conceptualizing, imagining, visualizing, or so forth. And then when we come to the cognize, the mental field, which is all of our thoughts, emotions, and so forth, then the instruction here, which is going to be the instruction we'll have later for the Shamatha practice, observing the mind, is let your gaze be vacant. To really have your eyes open in this practice, or this part of the practice, either naturally or partially, just resting your gaze in the space in front of you, and then just observing thoughts and emotions and so forth that are arising. Again, with bare attention, just observing directly. So this practice is really helping us to have that bare attention, observe directly the object of shamatha, but also giving a little taste of the meditation that we're going to introduce in the next session, the shamatha practice, observing the mind. So let's do that practice now. Find a nice, comfortable posture. Let's begin. As always, we begin by preparing the body, setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. And relaxing more deeply with each out-breath. Allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. And with each out-breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. And then, whilst remaining in this quiet, meditative state, open your eyes and bring your attention to the visual field in front of you, the field within which shapes and colors are appearing. And without conceptualizing, without labeling, simply with bare attention, directly observe what is appearing in this visual field. And in the scene, let there be only the scene. Now close your eyes and bring your attention to the auditory field, the field within which sounds are appearing. And without conceptualizing, without projecting or imagining, simply with bare attention, directly observe the sounds appearing in the auditory field. And in the heard, let there be just the heard. And now bring your attention to the field of the body, the field within which tactile sensations are appearing. And without visualizing the body, imagining the body, or conceptualizing, simply with bare attention, directly observe the sensations within the body. And in the sensed, let there be just the sensed. Now allow your eyes to be at least partially open, vacantly resting your gaze in the space in front of you. And now bring your attention to the field of the mind, the field within which mental events are appearing. Mental events such as thoughts, emotions, memories, mental images. And with bare attention, directly observe these mental events in the field of the mind. And in the cognized, let there be just the cognized. Without following thoughts, without trying to get rid of thoughts. Simply observe them directly with bare attention. and we can bring the meditation to a close. Okay, we have some time for question answer now. So do we have any questions there, Shia?
We have two questions, more informatical questions. From Benny, what is the name of His Holiness book that you quoted from?
Yeah, that's the book that was on the very first slide at the beginning yesterday, the Gallo Kagyu tradition of Mahamudra. It's a big fat red book that is his commentary on this text that we're following. I think it comes from two different teachings, one where he really focused a lot on the root text, and another teaching where he taught more extensively on the auto commentary that we also find in this text a little bit. So it's a very thick book. So that's the book I'm quoting from.
Okay, thank you. Second question from Dror. What is the meaning of the word sutra?
Sutra.
Yeah.
Sutra, I mean, it often just means the words of the Buddha. And so when we talk about the words of the Buddha, there's a whole big discussion about what that encompasses, because actually you find in a lot of the sutras, there is other people talking. You know, for instance, in the Heart Sutra, those of you, I think a number of you are very familiar with the Heart Sutra. There's very few words of the Heart Sutra that actually were directly spoken by the Buddha, but they're still considered to be the words of the Buddha. And so we won't go into that whole discussion here, but sutras basically are the words of the Buddha. And so then on the basis of those sutra teachings, then we have commentaries from great Indian masters, great Tibetan masters, who write commentaries on those various sutras. So if it's called a sutra, then it's the word of the Buddha. Tantra also is the word of the Buddha, but it's with the teachings he gave in the tantric aspect, not as the normal person, the historical Buddha. Those teachings that he gave as a historical Buddha, these are called sutras.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions?
Okay, another question from Dalit. Can you please explain what can you do in meditation if after you close your eyes there isn't pictures coming up mentally?
I'm not sure the question. If there's, sorry, you close your eyes and there's not coming up?
After you close your eyes, if nothing comes up, like no mental events, I think.
Yeah. We'll talk a bit more about this in the next session. For these sort of shamatha practices where we're observing the mind, observing thoughts, it's very much recommended to have the eyes open. And there are a number of reasons for that, and we'll discuss those at the beginning of the next session. But as with all shamatha practices, we want to have continuity of mindfulness, meaning that actually if we're observing our mind, and in other words, observing our thoughts, emotions, and so forth, sometimes our mind goes quiet. Sometimes there is no thoughts and emotions there. That's not a time to sort of switch off, because then we don't have a continuity of attention. So in the practice that we're going to start doing more extensively in the next session, then the object that we're focusing on is not just the thoughts and emotions and what's coming up in the mind, but actually the space of the mind itself, the space within which all of those are coming up. So therefore, if there's nothing coming up, that's okay. We're not trying to make something come up, but then just observe that space where all of our thoughts and emotions appear, and just observe that space and wait for that next mental event to arise in that space, and then observe it. And when that passes, then stay there in that space until the next thing arises. The reality is, for most of us as a beginner, there's just full of thoughts. So there's not much space to see there. It's like you know, like the thoughts are like clouds. Our sky is full of clouds usually, so there's not much sky to see there. But sometimes the clouds part and we see the sky. So sometimes our thoughts part and there's a bit of stillness. Just observe that space, that stillness of the mind. So that's what we're observing if there's no mental events coming up at that point. But we'll talk more about that next session. So if there's another question, we've got time, I think, for one more question.
Yes, we have one more question. In the bare attention meditation, can we choose the object, hearing, cognitive, etc., or should we go through all of them like we just did?
Yeah, that meditation was just really it was two reasons I introduced that meditation. One is to really to really get in the mode of bare attention, because in shamatha we're observing our object directly, whatever that object is. Sometimes we may use the breath, so then it's tactile sensations we're observing directly, meaning that if we're doing shamatha practice on the breath, we're not imagining the breath, we're not visualizing the breath, we're observing the tactile sensations directly, and so on. And so that was the first reason, just to get in that habit of observing the object directly and not conceptualizing, imagining, projecting, and so forth. And the second one was just to sort of cycle through and get a little taste of observing the mind, observing thoughts and emotions. But actually, there's a third thing as well I forgot to mention, is one of the biggest distractions, particularly as a beginner in meditation, is noise. And so often what happens is when some noise comes, we go, oh, go away, go away, go away. We have aversion to the noise. And then that just agitates our mind and makes it a lot worse. So if we have that perspective, you'll never be able to meditate anywhere, because even in a very quiet place, there will be some little sounds. And so if we have this sort of aversion to sound, you're going to find you're going to get very frustrated in meditating even in very quiet places. Whereas through doing this sort of practice here, bare attention to sounds, we can just observe the sound directly. Because when the sound comes and we develop aversion, it's our conceptual mind that makes the aversion. The actual sound on the eardrum is not such a big problem. It's the conceptual mind that goes, oh, that sound, I don't like it. It's interrupting me. It's causing me problems. Go away. That's what agitates the mind. So therefore, if sound comes, then not to get into that conceptual state. Just notice it and let it go. Let it go, let it go. And what we can do so that we won't have aversion. So by doing this bare attention with sound, and you may like to just do some sound meditations, then what you'll find is that will probably lessen your aversion to any noise in meditation, which means less problems when noise appears or comes up in meditation. But also what we can do then as a shamatha practice is, let's say we're observing the breath or we're observing the mind as shamatha, and we're at home on a particular day doing this. And then let's say on that particular day, our neighbor decides to do some home renovation and starts banging with a hammer constantly. Then we could get frustrated and upset at our neighbor, and then it'll be just a big mess. We could just stop the meditation and meditate another time, or we could take that as an opportunity and shift from whatever our object is to the sound of the hammer hitting the wall, and just use the sound of the hammer hitting the wall as our object of meditation. So then great, we can meditate perfectly well in that situation, because now we have a good object to focus on. So that's a few comments about that. Okay, time's up now. So let's take a break and we'll come back and we'll really go into this preparation in the next session. The preparation in terms of these 6 prerequisites, how to set up our life to support this practice, but also how to prepare our mind well at the beginning of every meditation session. So we'll be looking at those 2 topics next session, and also we'll start to move into this shamatha practice within Mahamudra, observing the mind, observing thoughts and emotions. We'll go into that in more detail in the next session as well. But let's take a break now, and we'll come back in 30 minutes.